The church called them witches, burned them, drowned them, silenced them, destroyed everything they wrote, erased everything they discovered, and then built cathedrals in their memory. For 2,000 years, the most spiritually gifted human beings in history were systematically hunted, suppressed, and destroyed by the very institution that claimed to represent God. They were not evil, they were not dangerous, they were not servants of darkness. They were women who had found God directly, without permission, without a priest standing between them and the divine. And that was the most terrifying thing the church had ever encountered. Carl Jung spent decades studying this pattern, the suppression of feminine spiritual experience throughout history, and he arrived at a conclusion that the church has never forgiven him for. Women did not need the church to find God. They never did. So why was the church so afraid? What did women discover, and what did the church destroy? Let me show you. Jung made a discovery that stopped him cold. In every culture, every civilization, every spiritual tradition in human history, women were the first mystics. Not men, women. The first people to document direct personal encounter with the divine were almost always women. The first healers, the first dreamers, the first ones who understood that God speaks not from above, but from within. Jung studied this pattern obsessively, across cultures that had never contacted each other, across centuries separated by thousands of years, the same pattern repeating. Women accessing the divine directly, without intermediary, without institution, without permission from any external authority. He found the reason in psychology. Women, Jung discovered, are naturally closer to the unconscious than men, more comfortable with mystery, more willing to sit in uncertainty, more capable of the honest inner stillness that genuine spiritual encounter requires. They did not need a system. They were already living inside the experience the system was trying to manufacture. And when the church arrived, it recognized this immediately, and it was terrified. But what exactly did the church see in women that frightened it so profoundly? Jung answered this with one devastating observation. The church saw women accessing God without them. Think about what that meant. An institution built entirely on being the necessary mediator between humanity and God, suddenly confronted with living proof that the mediation was never necessary. Women healing the sick, not through institutional sacraments, through direct spiritual knowing. Women prophesying, not through ordained channels, through direct divine encounter. Women leading communities, not through institutional hierarchy, through genuine spiritual authority that people recognized instinctively. Every gift the church claimed exclusive access to, women were demonstrating freely, openly, without permission. Jung worked with a historian once, a woman in her 60s who had spent her career studying early Christianity. She told Jung something that shook him. She said in the earliest Christian communities, women led everything: preaching, teaching, healing, administering the Eucharist. Jung asked, what happened to them? She said quietly, the same thing that always happens to people who make institutions unnecessary. They were erased. But how exactly did the church erase them? Jung studied this history with growing horror. It did not happen overnight. It was systematic, deliberate, carefully constructed over centuries. Step 1. Mistranslation. The earliest Christian texts gave women equal spiritual authority. The Greek word used for female spiritual leaders was the same word used for male leaders: deacon, elder, apostle.
When those texts were translated into Latin, something changed. The female titles were quietly downgraded. Female deacons became female servants. Female apostles became female companions. The same Greek word, translated differently depending on the gender of the person it described. Jung called this the greatest literary crime in human history. Not dramatic, not violent, simply a translation choice made by men who needed women's authority to disappear from the record. Step 2 was more violent. The women who could not be erased from texts were erased from life. Labeled heretics, accused of witchcraft, tortured into silence, burned into history as warnings to anyone who dared follow their example. Jung worked with a woman once, a devout Catholic in her 70s, who wept when she discovered this history. She said, "I spent my entire life obeying a church that burned the women who were closer to God than any priest ever was." But why did the church specifically target women who had spiritual gifts? Jung identified something that made everything clear. A spiritually gifted woman was the single most dangerous person an institutional church could encounter. Not because she was evil, not because she was wrong, because she was undeniable. When a woman healed someone the church could not heal, people noticed. When a woman described a direct encounter with God that was more real than anything they had experienced in decades of institutional religion, people listened. And people who listened to women finding God directly stopped needing the institution to find God for them. Jung documented a specific historical pattern. Every time a woman emerged with genuine spiritual gifts, the institutional response followed the same sequence. First, marginalization. She was called eccentric, emotional, unstable. Second, appropriation. If her gifts were too obvious to deny, the church absorbed her story, controlled her narrative, made her a saint on their own terms. Third, if she refused to be controlled, destruction. He worked with a woman once, a former nun who had left her order after 30 years. She told Jung quietly, "The moment I started having genuine spiritual experiences, the institution became afraid of me, not proud, afraid." Jung nodded. He said, "That fear was the most honest thing they ever showed you." But what were the specific women the church was most afraid of?
Jung studied them carefully, not as saints, not as theological curiosities, but as psychological case studies in direct divine encounter. Hildegard of Bingen, 12th century, a woman who received direct visions from God from childhood, who wrote music, theology, medicine, and natural science of breathtaking sophistication, who corresponded with popes and kings as an equal. The church suppressed her writings for 800 years. Mary Magdalene, the woman the Gospels describe as the first witness to the resurrection, the first person Jesus appeared to after death, the one he trusted, above all others, with the most important moment in Christian history. The church spent 2,000 years calling her a prostitute. There is not a single word in any gospel that describes her as such, not one. Jung wrote, "The deliberate destruction of Mary Magdalene's reputation was the most psychologically revealing act the church ever committed, because she was not destroyed because she was sinful. She was destroyed because she was powerful." He worked with a woman in her late 60s who had been a Bible scholar for 40 years. She told Jung with tears in her eyes, "I spent 40 years studying a book that had been deliberately edited to hide the women who understood it best." But what exactly did Mary Magdalene understand that the church needed to destroy?
Jung studied the Gospel of Mary, a text discovered in Egypt in 1896, a gospel written in Mary Magdalene's name, describing her private conversations with Jesus, the teachings he shared with her that he shared with no one else. And what those teachings described was not theology, not doctrine, not institutional religion. They described the inner journey, the psychological path to direct divine encounter, the process of turning inward, facing the shadow, meeting the self, discovering God not above you, but within you. Jung read these texts and recognized them immediately. He said, Mary Magdalene was not recording theology, she was documenting individuation 2,000 years before I named it. The Church suppressed this gospel completely, not because it was false, but because it made the institution unnecessary. If God is found within, through honest inner work, then no church, no priest, no sacrament is required. He worked with the Bible scholar again, who had discovered these suppressed texts late in her career. She sat across from Jung, visibly shaken. She said, Jesus gave his most profound psychological teachings to a woman, and the Church spent 2,000 years hiding it. Jung nodded quietly. He said, they did not just hide her teachings, they hid the entire model of spirituality she represented. But what was that model, and why was it so threatening?
Jung called it the feminine model of spirituality. Not feminine as in belonging only to women, but feminine as in the psychological qualities it required: receptivity, stillness, surrender, comfort with mystery, willingness to go inward rather than outward, trust in direct inner knowing rather than external authority. Jung discovered these qualities produce the most powerful spiritual experiences documented in human history. Every genuine mystic who ever lived, male or female, accessed God through these qualities. Teresa of Avila, John of the Cross, Meister Eckhart, the anonymous author of The Cloud of Unknowing, all of them describing the same inward journey, the same receptive stillness, the same direct encounter with the divine that required no institutional mediation. But the Church built its entire system on the opposite model, the masculine model, active, hierarchical, external, authoritative, performance-based, obedience-driven. Do these things, believe these doctrines, follow these rules, obey these authorities, and God, somewhere above, would respond accordingly. Jung wrote, the Church did not just suppress women, it suppressed the entire mode of spiritual encounter that women naturally embodied. And in doing so, it left billions of people with a system that could talk about God endlessly, but almost never actually produce the experience of Him. He worked with a former priest once who wept understanding this. But what happens when a woman reclaims this model today?
Jung documented this transformation with extraordinary detail. A woman came to him once in her early 70s, a lifelong Catholic, deeply devout, who had spent her entire life inside the masculine model of religion, performing, obeying, following external rules, seeking approval from an institutional hierarchy that consistently reminded her she could never lead, never preach, never access God directly, always needing a male intermediary between herself and the divine. She came to Jung not angry, exhausted. She said, I have followed every rule for 70 years, and I have never once felt God the way they described Him. Jung asked her one question. When was the last time you sat in complete silence, with no agenda, no prayer list, no performance required, simply listening inward? The woman thought for a long time. She said quietly, never. In 70 years of devoted religious practice, nobody ever told me to simply sit and listen inward. Jung gave her one instruction. Try it every morning, 15 minutes, no agenda, simply receive. She resisted. It felt passive, unproductive, almost ungodly compared to the active performance she had practiced her entire life. But she tried, and what happened next she described as the most significant moment of her entire spiritual life. But what exactly happened to her?
She returned to Jung 3 weeks later. She sat down slowly and was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Something happened on the 5th morning. I was sitting in silence as you suggested, 15 minutes. Nothing was happening. I was about to give up, convinced this was pointless, that God did not speak this way, that I needed the priest, the sacrament, the institutional process. And then..." She stopped, pressed her hand gently against her chest, then continued quietly. "Something opened right here, like a door I never knew existed, suddenly unlocking from the inside. And what came through that door?" She looked at Jung with eyes full of tears. She said, "Was not what the church described, not the demanding, evaluating God I had been performing for my entire life. It was warmth, vast, intelligent, completely knowing, like being seen by something that had always been watching, but never, not once, with judgment, only with love, the most complete love I have ever felt." She wept for a long time, then said something Jung wrote in his journals immediately. She said, 70 years. I spent 70 years looking for this in the wrong direction. It was always here within me the entire time. And nobody, in 70 years of devoted religion, ever told me to simply look inward." But why exactly had the church never told her?
Jung answered this without hesitation, because the moment she looked inward, she found what she found, and what she found needed no institution. He explained slowly. The church understood, perhaps better than anyone, that the inward journey produces direct divine encounter. They knew this. The mystics within their own tradition had documented it for centuries. Teresa of Avila described it, John of the Cross mapped it, Meister Eckhart preached it, and every single one of them was suppressed, investigated, or condemned by the same institution that later claimed them as saints, because the inward journey is institutionally catastrophic. A person who has felt what that woman felt on that 5th morning of silence does not need confession to feel forgiven, does not need a priest to feel God's presence, does not need an institution to guarantee her spiritual validity. She already knows. Jung worked with the former nun who had left her order after 30 years. She told Jung, "The day I started having genuine inner spiritual experiences, my superiors did not celebrate. They called me in for questioning." Jung asked, "What did they ask you?" She said, "They wanted to know where the experiences were coming from, whether they were from God or from somewhere else." Jung said quietly, "They were not questioning your experience, they were questioning their own authority, because your experience needed no validation from them." But what does all of this mean for women today? Jung said something that the woman in her 70s never forgot. He said, "Every spiritual gift the church burned women for having, you still carry. The capacity for direct divine encounter, the natural comfort with inner stillness, the intuitive knowing that arrives without institutional permission, the ability to access God directly without anyone standing between you and the experience. The church did not destroy these gifts. It could not. It only taught you to distrust them, to call your intuition dangerous, your inner knowing unreliable, your direct spiritual experiences suspect, possibly deceptive, requiring institutional validation before they could be trusted." Jung worked with dozens of women across his career who had genuine, extraordinary spiritual experiences, visions,
profound encounters in silence, dreams of breathtaking significance, moments of inexplicable knowing that proved accurate beyond any rational explanation. Every single one of them had been taught by the Church to be afraid of their own gifts, to hide them, minimize them, never speak of them publicly. Because the institution that burned women for spiritual gifts had never actually stopped fearing those gifts. It had simply found subtler ways to suppress them. The woman in her 70s listened to this quietly, then said, "I have had experiences my entire life that I never told my priest because I was afraid of what he would say." Jung asked gently, "What kind of experiences?" She said, "The kind that made me feel God was already here." But what should women do with these gifts today?
Jung looked at the woman quietly and said, "Trust them, not blindly, not without discernment, but with the same dignity and seriousness you would give any genuine experience of the divine." He gave her 3 specific instructions. First, stop waiting for institutional permission to trust your inner spiritual life. The Church that burned women for spiritual gifts was never qualified to validate them. It never was, it never will be. Second, begin documenting your inner experiences, dreams, moments of inexplicable knowing, encounters in silence that feel more real than ordinary life. Write them down, study them, take them seriously. Jung said the women the Church feared most were the ones who paid attention to their inner life, who treated their spiritual experiences as data, as genuine communication from the divine, rather than as dangerous anomalies to be suppressed. Third, find community with other women doing the same work. Because the Church suppressed women's spiritual authority by isolating them, making each woman feel her experiences were personal aberrations, private embarrassments, things never to be spoken aloud. But when women begin sharing their genuine spiritual experiences with each other, something extraordinary happens. They recognize each other immediately across different backgrounds, different traditions, different life stories, because they have all been touching the same divine reality that the institution spent 2,000 years trying to hide from them. The woman in her 70s wept quietly. She said, "I have been alone with these experiences for 70 years. Jung said gently, "You were never alone. You were simply never given permission to speak." So, what is the final truth Jung left behind for all of us?
So here is conclusion. What Carl Jung discovered about women and God. Women did not need the Church to find God. They never did. They were finding him directly, long before any institution existed to tell them they could not. And the Church knew this. That is exactly why it was afraid. Every woman earned as a witch was a woman the institution could not control. Every female mystic suppressed was a direct divine encounter the institution could not take credit for. Every spiritual gift silenced was proof that God was freely accessible without institutional permission. They did not burn women because women were dangerous. They burned them because women were free. Now, tell me, have you ever had a spiritual experience you were too afraid to speak aloud? Drop one word in the comments. Hidden, if you have kept your experiences secret. Awakening, if you are finally trusting your inner knowing. Free, if you have claimed your direct connection to God. I read every comment and I want to know, what has the institution cost your spiritual life? Subscribe to SYC Soul.
because the gifts the church burned women for having were never dangerous. This is SYC Soul. You were never meant to need permission to find God. You were born already connected, already knowing, already free.